Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 29, or Chapter 28. He put away his phone in the hall outside of Recovery Girl's office. He had been texting with Aizawa at Yagi's urging after he woke up. The talk he had with his mentor had been nice, but when he brought up how he had been feeling and how he didn't want anyone thinking he was trying to run away, Yagi had shaken his head with a smile. It had apparently been something he found incredibly fitting for Izuku, trying to please his new guardian more than focus on settling into living in a steady home again. Yagi insisted that all he needed to do was ask if it was okay to wander on walks, which he assured would undoubtedly be allowed, and just let him know when he would be out of the home. He made it sound so simple. It couldn't actually be that easy, in his opinion, but then again, he didn't really have any standard to base it off of in his memories. Izuku sighed as he walked down the hall to the field. He hadn't even gotten around to asking the stupid question, and they had been talking for a short while now. Recovery Girl had said the medal ceremony was going to start soon, and that he was free to go see it, though. He didn't intend to miss it. He had been curious about who made third place after Todoroki lost his match. The field was full once more. All the classes who had participated gathered in clusters. He pushed through the crowd with his usual ease, weaving thoughtlessly until he found his classmates. Tsuyu greeted him warmly, an indirect statement of her relief that he had healed fine. Shinso had a few singes in his hair, but looked otherwise unscathed, as Izuku stepped directly into his space. Tsuyu wasn't long to fall into place on his other side, giving him a bit of space to decide how close he wanted people to be at the moment. It was kind, and he smiled gratefully at her. He would have to figure out a way to thank her properly. She had every right to hold him at arm's length or further, but, if anything, only had shown to be all the more willing to befriend him. The winning trio walked onto the pedestals, and Izuku was proud to see Uraraka following behind Todoroki. Hound Dog was also walking with them, which Izuku assumed was a part of the ceremony. It did raise the question, though, as to where Ida had gone. He looked around discreetly, but didn't see him anywhere. He was about to ask about him when Midnight's voice rang out over the speakers. She was walking proudly along the stretch of grass in front of the pedestals, announcing the beginning of the medal ceremony proper. The reveal that Ida had left for a family emergency had him nervous. It was too vague. That could mean anything, but with the rigorous standards Ida held himself to, it wouldn't be anything close to trivial.
He got a call from his mom. Left in a hurry before his match with the Uraraka even started.
Shinso leaned down slightly to whisper to him. "I hope his family is okay," he whispered back. He couldn't imagine being called only to hear his mother had died or something. That would have crushed him.
I'm sure things will turn out. Hero hospitals tend to be cushy compared to standard ones.
Izuku didn't respond to that. It didn't make it any less terrifying, the limbo of someone being dead or not. He wouldn't wish it on anyone. He felt the strain of All Might in time with Midnight's announcement of his arrival to hand out the medals. Her words overlapped his jarringly, and the students at large muffled laughter at the clear miscommunication about his entry. All Might placed the medal over Uraraka's shoulders with bright commendation of her quick application and adaptive thinking. She looked up at him like he was handing her the stars from the sky. She held her arms out in a prompting manner, and All Might happily obliged. Izuku smiled, knowing how comforting the hugs were. In comparison, Todoroki looked as stiffly relaxed as could be, nerves showing only in his eyes as All Might approached with his medal in hand. He said something quietly to the hero, a whisper that was returned in kind, and Todoroki actually did relax a bit at the shared words. The medal was draped over his shoulders, and All Might offered a hand, which Todoroki accepted after a brief hesitation. Bakugo was practically vibrating in first place, his seething visible to anyone with eyes. Hound Dog took a few steps away with his arms crossed just off of the pedestal. The tension in Bakugo's body may as well have started splitting him apart just from the strain of his own muscles against themselves. He didn't speak to All Might or even move to accept or deny the medal. He simply broiled on his tiny stage, angry at his own success, even though he had boasted this fact before the festival even began. All Might filled the silence with his own words as he reached the small extra distance to place the metal over his shoulders. Tiny sparks started in Bakugo's palms, but cut off just as fast when Hound Dog shifted his stance just so. Izuku felt the way Todoroki's eyes snapped to him at the display. He made extra sure to not tense in any way. He wasn't exactly ready to flaunt all his issues to any one person yet. He had been handling Bakugo well enough since the school year had started anyways. The sound hadn't even reached where the crowd of students were standing anyways, as the stadium seats roared as the last medal being awarded. All Might started to close out the ceremony before allowing Midnight to continue with all final announcements and such. The students were being directed out of the field by ascending letter order, which meant their class would be last. Shinso settled an elbow on his shoulder. Kirishima took the time to excitedly approach the trio as they waited. The three on the pedestals were being spoken to by Midnight, so he had taken up the duty of explaining his match with the Raraka alone. Each part of the intended summary was punctuated with wide and highly animated motions. He clearly was still excited about the fight, and the riled energy was escaping through said motions. He was practically raving about how manly she had been the whole time, and that he wouldn't have considered some of the moves she pulled in such quick reactions. Shinzo was barely holding back his laughter as Kirishima described it all. The way Izuku could piece it together said it had been a rather close match. Kirishima had danced on the defensive to only take jabs and swipes that would keep a Raraka from being able to actually use open palms. His slip-up had been trusting an opening, one that had been too broadcasted to have been truly trustworthy, according to Shinzo, and jumping back a moment too late. He essentially threw himself out of the arena with a jump. In the locker rooms, Izuku only had to grab his bag, having changed out of his gym uniform while he had been in Recovery Girl's office. He was feeling a little tired, but knew he still had a ways to go before he could rest. The pressing buzz of restlessness still a constant reminder under his skin. Most people were talking, recounting the parts they liked or what they found interesting during the games. When the three winners walked in, there was a round of congratulations from everyone in the room. Ida still had not returned, and his locker was empty. He must have left the campus entirely the moment he had been called out by his mother. His phone pinged audibly, and he jumped, having forgotten that he had turned on the ringer earlier. It had been a short text from Aizawa just asking if he was ready to leave. He sighed and stood up from where he was sitting in the now empty locker room. He hadn't realized it had been as long as it had been. Aizawa didn't talk on the walk home. He had looked at Izuku and just sighed before just patting his shoulder and leading their way home. It let Izuku have time to finally think without any controlled chaos going on nearby. If it hadn't been for the knowledge and feeling of a shift coming his way, he would have dared to call it actually fun. It had felt so carefree, especially the first round, to be able to just run and not worry about others while doing so. The fact that he didn't have any aches and pains that were pressing for him to take and let him just zone into the feeling of the race, it was like being a kid again. When he would have the breaks in the school year that let him just explore and run and figure out how to read maps and direction from the sun when in the woods. All sorts of those small things that he had sort of brushed away as he got older and survival was getting harder. Izuku was taking his shoes off just inside the door of the home when he finally zoned back in.
Got some water and a snack if you're feeling hungry at all. Recovery Girl's healing burned your calories faster than they would have normally been spent.
Aizawa instructed as he walked up the stairs, the balcony door sliding open some, just to come right back down. Okay. He was setting a glass on the counter when it actually dawned on him. He was going to have a shift in a house. He was far too large to shift in a house. He had to be. Maybe if he tried to curl up the whole time, it would help him not break anything, but that was going to drive him mad. He took the glass, not bothering to fill it, just wanting to hold it at this point. He looked at the living area and the size of the room and frowned. He hadn't shifted inside of a house since he was 6. There was far too much he could break that was expensive, and he had no real room in there to move around. He watched as Aizawa was typing away on his laptop, only now registering that his cast was gone. The last hints of his injuries at USJ now fell to the scars he would carry until they faded. The tap of the keys let him zone out. The repetition of the noise was gentle enough to settle his nerves. He tried to figure out how to ask if he could leave for his shift when Aizawa closed the laptop. He blinked back into focus as he watched him stand and stretch his back out. When he stepped past Izuku towards the door, he finally fell into motion himself. "Where are you going?" he asked, pulling his still empty glass closer to his chest.
You usually go on long runs or something similar on these nights, correct?
Aizawa looked up at him while lacing up his boots.
You still need to get water, Midoriya.
Izuku just kind of nodded absently as he went to get the water. He didn't drink much before walking back to where Aizawa was still seated on the step up into the house proper. "You didn't answer where you were going, though." He was confused. Was his presence in the home preventing Aizawa from doing things he usually did?
We are going for a run. Your other form is faster than I could ever be, though, so would you be against me using you as an anchor for my gear? I would warn you beforehand, obviously. I don't intend to infringe on your space.
He said it so simply, as if this was just the next reasonable step in Izuku's integration into Aizawa's life, and Aizawa into Izuku's. Maybe I haven't ever exactly... He paused with a huff as he put the glass in the sink and walked back again. "I've never actually had a shift where I explored with someone before."
I figured as much. If you want to think about it as me acting to sate my own curiosity, you can, but I can take you home afterwards. You have a place to return to now, and even though you've been here for a week, that doesn't mean you know how to get here quickly from any direction.
He stood and gestured vaguely.
We should leave now if you want to travel any certain distance before you have to do your whole deal.
He made it just sound so incredibly simple, as if this was something mundane and not some completely inhuman process. It made it sound normal. Izuku picked at his fingers.
You'll mess up your fingers if you keep that up. It's better if you do it to your shirt like I've seen you do before.
His tone wasn't scolding as he corrected the action. "Where did you plan on going?" Izuku asked, hands stilling.
I figured you would lead the way.
Izuku hesitated as he thought of places he hadn't been able to visit in a while. "I can go wherever?"
Midoriya, you're free to leave whenever.
He paused.
Did you think you weren't allowed to leave before this?
He shrugged a bit without really looking at him. Aizawa let out a soft sigh. "I didn't want anyone to think I was trying to run off."
Kid, you've been living on the streets and wandering freely for years. No one would expect you to just stay cooped up without issue right off the bat.
Izuku considered this a moment before he moved to put his shoes on as well. I have a place I want to visit," he finally said after tapping the toe of a shoe on the floor so that it sat more comfortably on his foot. Aizawa just gestured to the door.
As I said, lead the way.
They started to walk, Izuku leading them past a train station wherein Aizawa made a prompting gesture in its direction. It took a second for Izuku to even connect the option in his brain.
I wouldn't have pointed it out if the cost was a concern, Midoriya. You could save your energy this way. If there's a train headed in the right direction, at least.
Aizawa stopped him before he even got to bring up his lack of cash. The pause at the station showed that no train was heading the way he needed from this specific station. That was fine. Izuku wanted to walk anyway. They were a quarter of the way, having dipped in and out of alleys as needed to avoid streets that were filling with nightlife, by the time the buzzing under his skin started to pull at his grip directly. He had managed to appropriately space them out of any direct sights. Looking around, he didn't see any windows or people. Aizawa looked like he was about to say something before he just let go, the shift swaddling him in a painless heat. The jump in temperature always got him, just because it made the air temperature feel different too. He looked at his teacher, unsure of what exactly to say to him. It's not like they were where he wanted to be yet. He just couldn't hold on to his form anymore.
I'm just coming along with Dory. Once again, lead the way. I'll say it however many times you need to hear it.
Aizawa's hand was resting against his gear.
I assume the next move is up?
Izuku nodded and watched how Aizawa nimbly ascended the buildings they were between, his gear and hands finding holds Izuku would never have thought to consider. He tilted his head a bit as he tried to see the specific spots and how they differed from the rest of the clutter on the building's walls. Some of the points obviously wouldn't take Izuku's weight, but others were possibilities he hadn't known to be right before him. The anxiety and fear-based stress he had expected to haunt him this entire shift started to melt away as curiosity pressed forward in his mind. How did he notice those so fast? He leapt up, using one of the footholds that he only noticed because of Aizawa's path he had taken. On the roof, he looked at the man with a still curious head tilt. What? His tired voice was exactly the same as if they were at home or in class. He wasn't treating him differently in any way. Izuku wasn't sure why he had convinced himself he would. He warbled softly, not really sure what words to say.
You stick to the rooftops a lot of the time?
Izuku nodded.
I take it that it's for your own comfort then.
Monsters! You scare people! He walked past him to the edge of the building, easily hopping to the next one.
Doodleberries aren't monsters. Principal Nezu isn't one for lying, just to make someone feel better.
Aizawa had to take a running start to land next to him. Izuku's antennae fell flat back. Of course he should have considered that Nezu would tell the necessary people the specifics of his being, but it was... He sighed, knowing something was completely separate from believing that something. He still scared himself sometimes, if he was honest. He didn't bother with responding, though. He just wanted to find the night market he was heading for. It was a different angle than usual, but he could recognize some of his usual landmarks, even from where he was. He glanced at Aizawa one last time, making sure to catch his eye a moment and check out his body. It was time for his run. He started at a jog that bled into a gallop, clearing gaps in the closely nestled buildings easily. Aizawa was trailing him steadily, although clearly having to fully run to keep up. He picked up his pace a bit as they reached a much larger gap, an especially large street breaking the connection of roofs. There was a raised railway in the center that Izuku could use as a stepping stone of sorts. He made the jump without thought. It was an easy one for him when he heard a quiet whistle from Aizawa. He glanced and saw Aizawa ready to cast out his gear. Izuku stuck one of his arms to the side and felt the clutch of the cloth tighten on his fur. He made sure his second part of the leap was a bit higher so that Aizawa wouldn't hit under the railway roofing. He stalled on the roof he slid onto and turned to see Aizawa roll across the concrete floor and retract the gear. He was breathing heavily compared to Izuku's steady puffs of breath from his vents.
Didn't know you could jump that far.
Aizawa looked behind them while Izuku let him catch his breath. Can jump farther, Izuku corrected the assumed maximum distance. He huffed an amused breath at that.
Yeah, no wonder you busted me so easily.
Izuku didn't let his feathers lift in any sort of preening way. It would be rude. He was tired down to his bones already anyways. The high-energy expense of the festival games all day leaving him weary. He turned and started on their way again. Aizawa didn't voice any complaints. The leaps and bounds were easy, memorized patterns that having a companion for was oddly comforting in the same way that rain felt comforting when crying. On one of the low business buildings, the kind that was long enough to effectively work as a runway, Izuku allowed himself to stretch out using all 6 legs. Aizawa's low whistle didn't even drag his attention away from the leap he was about to make. He just lifted his tail and hoped he wouldn't grab just a single quill again. He didn't, but Izuku did hear the slight intake of breath Aizawa took as he realized what Izuku was doing. The waterway sailed under them, crisp and gentle waves steadily rolling as Izuku's feet hit the dock with the running pace maintained. He staggered to a slow enough pace that he turned just in time to snatch the capture gear in his mouth. He swung Aizawa in a slowing circle so that the man could safely roll to a stand again. Izuku didn't pause this time, though. He was in the open on the docks. He legged it to the nearest warehouse and leapt up containers and vehicles to reach the roofs again.
My earlier statement was not a challenge, Midoriya.
Aizawa landed on the roof behind him and pushed his hand through his hair, forcing the loose curls out of the way. I know. Izuku sat and scratched near one of his vents with a taloned toe. Market is this way, though. We're almost there.
Of course, this is just something you do in free time,
he grumbled in quiet exasperation. Izuku stood again and began trotting onwards. No more big jumps.
I don't think you get to decide what's big or not given the size difference here.
Aizawa gestured between them as he followed. It was friendly conversation, without any doubt, but it was strange to consider that as an option. Well, like this. It was only 10 or so minutes of Izuku at a gallop and Aizawa running to keep up, for them to reach a roof near the night market. The noise was lively and steady. Different merchants called out prices and sales and orders of foods and drinks. Groups of friends or families laughing and talking echoed up to them as Izuku settled down onto the roof. He laid as flat as he could, antenna drooping back to be effectively hidden by the lip of the edge of the roof. Aizawa, on the other hand, sat on the edge of the roof. He was breathing in that pointedly paced way that gave away exactly how out of breath he truly was. Izuku's soft puffs contrasted starkly in how easily they came.
So, we catch our breath, then head back?
Aizawa was watching the crowd below them. Izuku rattled at him.
Alright then. Alright, tell me when then.
He pulled out his phone and started to tap away. He yawned slightly, eyes watering as they squinted, and stretched his arms forward. He felt out with his quirk to the entire market below. There wasn't all that much tonight. Typical aches and pains of folks on their feet too long threaded through the crowd like the scents of fresh meats and chilled sweets. He grabbed at the simple ones in a calm confidence that came with the years of practice. Arthritis here, a presumed butcher nicked himself there, a likely kid with an overactive tail that got stepped on somewhere on the far side of the market. The scrapes, bumps, and bruises that naturally occurred in the lives of busy people all pulled away under his grasp. He felt the way his skin and muscles got tender, torn, sliced, and abrased by non-existent means. By the time Aizawa looked up from his phone, he had pretty much cleared out the market of any injuries.
Hey!
I always do this, he said while looking away from him.
That doesn't make it good for you.
It's so small. It makes their days and nights better, Izuku defended himself.
Midoriya.
It will all be healed by morning. They both stared each other down as Izuku worked up the nerve to stare back. Aizawa closed his eyes first with a heavy sigh.
All right. I'm trusting you to be open about this.
He didn't sound happy to be doing so. Izuku looked away to watch the clouds skittering their way across the dimly lit sky. By the time the moon was a little more than halfway across its journey in the sky, Izuku felt his grip catching on the edges of his form. He sucked in a deep breath just to yawn and stretch his body out. Aizawa noticed the stretching and got up to do the same, crouching low to stretch each leg separately. He tucked his phone into his pocket.
Home.
The word tugged at his chest. Yeah. He turned back towards the docks. It would be a slight detour, but there was a crane for the boats that stuck up high enough and far enough for Izuku to clear the waterway back. He warbled preemptively at Aizawa when he stalled briefly at the base of said crane.
Oh, of course,
he muttered in defeat as Izuku climbed the metal with ease. He wasn't far behind when Izuku crouched at the top, waiting patiently.
I'm not gonna ride you like an animal, Midoriya.
Swim then! He quipped back. He was tired. He didn't want to have his tail pulled on again either. Aizawa groaned in general disbelief that he was about to do what it was, and climbed onto Izuku's shoulders. His fingers dug into his fur, and Izuku darted forward, kicking hard off the end of the crane. It gave slightly, like usual, and they cleared the waterway with only Aizawa's mumbled swears following them. The moment Izuku was moving slow enough, Aizawa dropped off his shoulders. They kept moving. By the time the sky was starting to get a little brighter, they were only about 2/3 of the way back. They had already dropped to the roads. Izuku shifted back to his human self. Aizawa at some point had taken the lead on their trip back, steadily guiding Izuku in a way that let him blearily stop paying as much attention as he probably should have been.
You shouldn't have pushed yourself to go so far after yesterday if you knew you were gonna be this tired on the way back.
He scolded without much heat. A tap on his shoulder had him adjusting his direction to match Aizawa's turn around the corner.
Usually I'll sleep where I stop, he mumbled.
No wonder you showed up so tired.
Another tap. It was nice not having to think too hard about where he was going. He didn't know how Aizawa wasn't feeling as bleary as he was. He didn't even realize they were home until he heard the click of the door unlocking. He took off his shoes and pushed them to the side sloppily. If he had been more awake, it would have probably made him anxiously embarrassed to do so, but right now he was exhausted. He hit the bed hard, not even remembering the walk to his room or changing his clothes. When he opened his eyes shortly after to the sun directly in them, he was warm. It was a comfortable pressure of being bundled in blankets, and for once, he wasn't terribly sore and bone-deep exhausted after a shift.